one of the things I'm aware of course, in hindsight, is my response to that was what's usually called staying closeted. What that really meant was I was repressing any sense of physical attraction to, in my case, other males, but at the same time trying to date heterosexually without having any of the underlying desire, attraction.
So was this a
Or
camouflage? Were you trying to fit in? Were you?
yeah, I was trying to fit in, and not surprisingly, um, the dating that I did in high school, the dating that I did in college, right into graduate school, was essentially heterosexual but asexual.
Mm,
And so I was living probably the most celibate form of dating you could possibly have lived. So I lost out on a whole range of opportunities then to really develop the sense of intimacy that comes through sexuality, and that included not so much just the physical sexuality, but the whole emotional matrix in which that should reside. It's impossible to be loving someone and trying to express that love through sexuality if you've repressed your emotional capacity for doing that.
so that was part of the formation, the transformation of Joe Marchesani.
Yes,
And you survived those times.
I did, but I have to say that by the time I hit middle age, it had become a source of despair for me.
Despair.
Yeah, I recognized that my hopes of having that kind of intimate relationship, even after I came out and started dating men instead of women, but every one of those relationships was doomed because I had never built up that capacity for emotional intimacy
Mm.
as a entryway into that. I couldn't be vulnerable. I couldn't really attend to other
That's an
people's
interesting term
vulnerability.
of capacity for emotional intimacy.
Yeah,
We often talk about emotional sobriety in the 12-step world.
right.
Emotional intimacy, say more about that.
Okay. Um, Emotional intimacy means that I'm willing to be vulnerable about how I'm feeling. And in doing that, I'm asking basically that the person that I'm talking to or um, sharing space with um, will also have a capacity for that emotional vulnerability that will help them to understand where I am, and it will also help them to accept and attend actively to what I'm saying.
So, emotional intimacy, you're also talking about being honest with yourself
Mm-hmm.
and dealing with that inner critic and that dialogue in your head all at
Right,
the same time.
right.
Wow, sounds daunting.
It is. It is. And that was the experience with my sexuality. Um, I would have to say was traumatic. It was followed up by my experience of being drafted and sent to Vietnam, which was in its own way morally traumatic. So I came into full adulthood with a whole set of experiences that had shut me down emotionally, had shut me down morally, and made it very, very difficult then.
Did you have any assistance during this time? Did you have any allies? Did you have any like minded individuals?
Um, I had friends. I regarded them as close friends. I was willing to listen to them, but I was not willing to share myself.
Mm.
And that's not a formula for sustainable intimacy.
So this is not only dealing with the forms of sexuality, Joe.
Right,
This is dealing with all types of inferiority complexes. This is talk
right,
about anxiety. This is talk about depression. Even
right.
people who may be experiencing some psychotic symptoms, some psychosis that
Mm-hmm.
they're afraid to actually share with other people because they feel
Right.
it's different from other folks.
Mm-hmm.
How today, looking back in
Yeah.
hindsight, how would you have helped yourself back then?
Well, I think had I been able to help myself then, um, I probably wouldn't be here now.
Hmm.
But as I said, I would listen to others. And in some ways, that definitely helped me to develop a capacity for empathy. The problem was I couldn't apply it to myself.
Mm.
And it was only um, when I actually came into recovery that I began to learn about self compassion and practices I
Self
could use
compassion.
to
So,
develop that.
quite often we talk about people, we introduce the concept that flowers don't compare themselves to other flowers in a garden, they
Right,
bloom.
right,
And which was when we introduced the holistic lifestyle, we introduced the concept of self-love, and then it's not arrogant or conceit.
right,
It's very important for you to self-grow.
right.
And I often talk about the Bible's Jesus when they asked him what the two greatest commandments were.
Hmm.
Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole soul, and your whole mind, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
To me,
Mm.
I know anybody can dispute my interpretation of this. Feel free. However, what I'm hearing the Bible's Jesus saying is you can only love someone else in direct proportion to how much you love yourself.
And I couldn't agree more. I think that is at the core of what I would now call my spiritual awakening. Um, that particular passage in the Gospels where Jesus talks about loving God above all and loving your neighbor as yourself, he's challenged. Who is my neighbor? And he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. And then he just asks, and which of these figures, not the two religious people that he mentions
Mm-hmm.
who just kind of pass by
Mm-hmm.
and push that away because it violates their ritual practices, but this outsider who is not particularly welcome among the Jewish people is the one who shows true compassion and goes out of his way to help the injured individual. Um, when we find a way to um, recognize that kind of compassion, to be able to apply that to ourselves, it's like you have to be your own good Samaritan in some sense.
Be your own good Samaritan.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And so um, for me, the process of doing that, I think, involved, first of all, recognizing that I did have a capacity for compassion for other people, and I needed to learn how to apply that to
Mm.
myself. Um, it's a challenge because that came after years of a very powerful, critical inner voice. This voice of compassion had the same kind of feeling for me that I identify as spiritual awareness.
So this program is much like a 12-step recovery room where it's
Yes,
it's not so much as talking about the problem, it's talking about the solution. It's
yes,
saying, "Yes, I acknowledge this happened. However, here's what I did about it."
right,
And your story's fascinating, but I'm going to have to blow your ego a little bit. This
right.
show is not about you.
I
It's
understand
it's
that,
it's about how you've traveled through your life
right,
and how others can incorporate the same things, choose what works for
right.
them. We have a strong desire to help people.
So much of the change has been um, attending. I mean, I would say it's a combination of mindfulness, definitely, being aware of where I am at the present moment, and being aware of the choices that are available to me in that moment, not relying on habits that I'd developed previously that were really consequences of that negative sense of self. Um, one can't change. I can't change. Nobody else can change unless they find something that they can substitute for those habits, and that includes this ability to develop self compassion.
So you're talking about no one can do this by themselves.
Right.
Okay. So just as people out there are probably aware of my own journey, but I'd like to hear about your entry into recovery and how it affected your life.
Okay. Uh, Short answer is it affected my life totally. I entered into this journey when I was in the first really long-term relationship that I had had, and it became evident to me that the quality of that relationship was deteriorating. That instead of being emotionally and mutually enriching, just the opposite was happening. That I was withdrawing emotionally, shutting down, which is typically what had happened to me when I had tried to establish relationships previously. And the same thing was happening with my partner. And then we hit a crisis, um, and my partner came to me, and he was in trouble basically. And I said to myself, if we're going to save this relationship, he has to change. Okay. And he went into therapy, he went into recovery himself. And over a 3 year period of my own yoga practice, but also listening to him talk about his recovery meetings and his therapy, it became increasingly clear to me what my responsibilities had been with my addictive habits that had developed. And at that point, I recognized not that we were going to salvage this relationship, we were going to create this relationship
Ah, I
because it
like that.
hadn't
I like
existed.
that word.
Okay. And I was able to characterize the core of my addiction, which was this aversion to intimacy, and discover, again, through the guidance of the 12 steps, and they're leading me into a different interpretation, a much better interpretation, certainly more nurturing interpretation of my higher power, that I could then begin to build a foundation for the intimacy that that relationship required.
So the whole idea is you had to do some introspection yourself. There's a
Mm-hmm.
common misconception that 12-step recovery is about stopping using drugs, stopping using alcohol,
Right.
stopping codependency, stopping overeating,
Right.
gambling, those
Right.
type of things. When the first step is the only one that ever mentions the addiction.
Right.
And the other steps, the first three steps are commitment steps. Steps 4 through 9 are action steps, and then there's the maintenance steps.
Right.
But it's a design for living.
Right.
It's not putting something through a washing machine.
Right. And I run into this all the time. I sponsor a lot of people in my recovery groups, and it's always a challenge. I say to them, look, step one is about what you're unable to do for yourself because that's all based on your addiction. So the rest of the steps are what you can do instead. And you're really creating yourself, you're creating a new sense of yourself, a much truer sense of who you are and what you're able to
That's
do.
exciting.
It
That's
is.
we can look at it one. We can look at it as a chore, or we can look at it as an epic journey.
Right. I mean, it's a sense of opportunity. And I say, this uh, completely compassionate and unconditionally compassionate being is always there. But every day, every moment is an opportunity for you to step back and pay attention to that presence. And when you can pay attention to that presence, you can bring that into every moment of your life.
So we're talking about the eternal. We're talking about the divine. We're talking about whatever type of name you want to give it.
Right.
The so hum, I am that. Oh, we're
Right.
all connected. Talk to us about the connectivity, Joe.
Okay. My sense is that this sense of spirit, whatever it may be, is and has been present in everything that we think of as creation. Um, However you want to interpret that, it's there. It's right at the center of how creation unfolds. And as we have some sense now, creation has been unfolding for billions of years. And it just happens that, we're one of the later developments in that. Um, and so it means that that potential for being unconditionally loved is not only available to us, it's within us. And it means that we can also love unconditionally. We have to love ourselves unconditionally, regardless of whatever our shortcomings may be. And when I feel that, I'm then able to project that onto what Quakers would call that of God in everyone and see them through that rather than through my narrower perspective of inadequacy.
So what we're trying to do is find some roadmaps and perhaps some directional advice and the actual how to, not just
Right,
make lemonade.
right.
The idea out there is that the basic concepts of loneliness, isolation, fear, I don't fit in, I'm not like other people.
Hmm.
We get so alone and so fearful that the introduction into the 12 step world, where it's often said that it's our singleness of purpose that bind us together. And we make no apologies stating that there has to be some type of a spiritual connection, some type of a spiritual foundation.
Yeah.
And the deal is, how does a person develop that? It's a spiritual journey. It's not an
Hmm.
event.
Hmm. Yes, I am fond of saying to my sponsees, if you're waiting for the burning bush, you're on the wrong path. Um, in so many of the 12 step fellowships, there is a sense that a first approximation of a higher power is to listen to the other people in the meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever they may have to say, some of it may resonate with you, some of it may not. But when it resonates, then you're finding a way to understand what your higher power wants for you.
So there's a line that says, as soon as a person has the willingness to believe
Hmm.
that there may be a power greater than themselves, they're
Right,
on their way. And the key word there, Joe, is willingness.
right.
So many of us are willful. We come
Hmm.
in willful.
Hmm.
So how did you develop that willingness?
Um, well, there is always a sense of desperation when one comes into a recovery program. I happen to be able to ease into it in a way that probably alleviated some of that desperation. But I remember feeling when I recognized um, kind of the oh my God moment, I need to be in this recovery program. It felt like I had fallen off a cliff.
So you're talking about a moment of clarity.
Right. And um, following that in relatively short order for me was a sense, but my partner has fallen off that cliff and he's better than he was. And so something happened after he fell off that cliff. He let go of his old self, basically,
Let go. Let
and
go.
began to develop that sense of the person he really needed
So
to
there's a paradox in 12 step recovery. It
be. Hmm.
says you have to surrender to win.
That's right. That's right.
So we have to understand and try to develop that beginner's mind and say, well, how were things working before?
Right.
Whatever you were doing, how was it working in
Right.
your life? You have to actually confront people about that
Right.
or confront yourself.
Right. And I certainly had to confront myself before I could confront other people.
So if we could just give people the gift of desperation,
Yes.
the gift of desperation,
Yes.
look at it as a gift.
Right. The challenge there is that I became, and I'm sure lots of other people coming into recovery became masters of denial, which is a way of screening yourself from the desperation and the honesty that's required before you can even get to the willingness. I think is a key there.
So could you share with people what your life's like today, Joe?
Today, I'm actually happily married to this person. It's a completely reconstructed relationship. Um, I think, partly because we are both in recovery, we have a profound understanding of each other's shortcomings and a really unconditional acceptance of each other as we are, um, as we work hand in hand to um, turn this program into our lives going forward. Um, these are things that we talk about pretty regularly. We both became members of a Quaker meeting because we felt the spiritual presentation of that particular faith community matched very well our sense of what we needed for our recovery. And we had our marriage ceremony in a Quaker meeting, and our marriage vows basically said, "I promise that I will nurture in you that of God in the same way that I will nurture it in myself."
Are you happy today, Joe?
Absolutely, I've
Do you
never
do,
been
do you
happier.
have some joy in your life?
A lot.
So at some point in your life, you learn to differentiate between pleasure and joy.
Yes, for sure.
Well, we're so glad you were able to join us this evening, Joe. And I know we could talk the rest of the evening on this particular topic. However, I think you've really touched on some really poignant points that I hope some people out there can understand. And our closing message to everyone out there, that if you're facing the four horsemen of addiction, and remember, everybody's in recovery from something, and those four horsemen are terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. Please understand that you don't have to face them by yourself. We urge everyone out there to seek help. Seek help of a friend. Attend a 12-step meeting. Attend some therapy. Attend if there's a particular spiritual, religious type of leader that you would prefer to talk to contact a trusted friend. We ask that you please, we challenge you to take care of yourself and do that for yourself. And as always, we give a free prescription at the end of every podcast. Fruits, nuts, and vegetables. Unplug your television and take up fishing. And for a truly mindful experience, we suggest that you fish without bait. Do a kindness for yourself, do a kindness for another. Forgive yourself, forgive another. Till all are free, none are free. Namaste.
Please check out our website at fishingwithoutbait.com, where you can listen to the show, comment on our discussions, and find out where you can subscribe to our podcast. If you're interested in flying the colors of Fishing Without Bait, click the shop icon on our website. We have clothing, mugs, cell phone cases, and so much more. Show the world that you fish without bait. This show is a member of the Sorgatron Media Podcast Network. Find out more at sorgatronmedia.com.